Good evening and welcome to Women's Wednesdays in August. We've just returned from our short summer break in the series and really excited to be back this time to talk about something that has come up so many times in different sessions, talking about this intersection between gender, or the intersection of gender and race. Really excited to have two experts with us from the UN Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. So we have with us Bahamian Gaynel Curry, who I'm sure the Bahamians with us are used to Gaynel. You've seen her, heard from her, you know her work, that she is very much an expert in human rights and has been in UN spaces for a long time. And we are also joined all the way from St. Lucia by June Soomer, who is also an independent expert on the Permanent Forum, UN Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And I won't do a whole lot of introduction. They are going to tell us what the forum is, why it exists, their goals as independent expert members of the forum, and talk a little bit more about intersectionality, what it means to hold these two identities at the same time, being of African descent and being a woman, and some of the things that we can actually do using the UN Forum and other multilateral organizations to address the specific needs and respond to the specific experiences of Afro-Caribbean women in particular. Throughout this session, we do encourage you to engage. If you would like to make a comment or anything, just feel free to just use the raise hand icon so we can see you and call on you. And that's just to avoid any crosstalk. We're not trying to censor anyone. We are recording, so if you don't want your name used or your face to show up on the screen, just keep your video off, your mic off, and use the comment section. And we'll be sure to read any comments, questions, concerns, or any other contributions that you add there. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Gaynel. I think, Gaynel, you're starting us off, right? And we will get started.
I am. Thank you very much, Lucia. It's always a pleasure. So good evening to everyone, and thanks again to Lucia and Equality Bahamas for inviting me to be a part of this Women's Wednesday. This is not my first Women's Wednesday. I'm always excited to be a part of it, but I'm really thrilled by the topic that we're going to be discussing today, the intersections of Blackness and womanhood. I'm especially pleased to be sharing this virtual platform with my fellow member of the United Nations Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, Dr. June Soomer, a brilliant colleague who really gets it on these issues. And Alicia has mentioned a little bit about June already, but I do encourage you to take some time to have a look at our webpage on the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and read a little bit more about the various members of the forum, and you'll see there a little bit more about June and myself and what the forum is all about. So let me jump in. In a recent article, I wrote that racism is humiliating and it produces a kind of fatigue that lives in the cells of Black people. And that burying our heads in the sand and refusing to call out racial discrimination does not help. And that we need to all be intentionally anti-racist. To do so, we must understand what it is we're talking about when we use the term racism or racial discrimination. And we must understand how our use of, how this impacts really different people differently. So in preparing this presentation, I thought I would start by looking up really some definitions around the terms that we use for this theme. So I looked up the word Blackness and what do we mean? So I looked at the Oxford Dictionary, my usual go-to, I have to add. It says that Blackness is the fact or state of belonging to any human group having black or dark colored skin. So what we refer to as Black people, or generally people of African descent. We know that may be varying shades of Black. So the second thing I looked up is womanhood, and that the dictionary described that as the qualities considered to be natural or or characteristic of women. It doesn't necessarily speak about the issue of gender, but it's speaking about women in the biological term. So a state or condition of being a woman. And then I looked up intersectionality, and this was interesting for me. It's about the interconnected nature of social characterizing such as race and class and gender as they apply to individual groups of persons. It concerns overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination and disadvantages. So today this is an opportune time for us to speak about this. There's a lot happening in the space around racial discrimination. We just in the Bahamas and around the region, of course, had celebrated Emancipation Day. We're getting ready at the end of this month, the 31st of August, to commemorate the International Day of People of African Descent. We're launching this new permanent forum of people of African descent. And so we're rounding into our final 2 years of the decade of people of African descent. There's been a lot of discussion of this issue since George Floyd. So there's a lot on this issue recently. And so I'm happy that that we're talking about it. And I think it's an opportune time for us to do so in the context of Women's Wednesday and to make those connections between race and sex. So I've been talking about this issue for a while. And so the question often comes up, why are you still talking about racism? Why are you talking about this? It's an old story. It's talking about slavery and colonialism and all of this. This is an old story. I was on a radio station where that was said to me quite bluntly. Why are you still talking about this? And quite frankly, I'm still talking about it because it still exists. And racism is still a reality for millions of people around the world. I think we have something like 200 million people of African descent that still face racism in the Americas, that is. And why are we still talking about discrimination based on sex? And this is a conversation we have in the Caribbean often. Oh, what more do you women want? Don't you women have enough? What more are you talking about? What about men? And we know about those discussions here with Lucia and others who work on issues of gender and women's rights in the region. Quite frankly, we're still talking about it because discrimination against women in law and practice is still a reality. We've had just recently our second referendum on trying to address discrimination based on sex in the Constitution, which was not successful. Basically, I think about 80% of the population said no, they did not want to change the Constitution. So that remains a concern. So we still have it in law and in practice. And why are we talking about Black women in particular? Should we be talking about just Black people or people in general, right? And having that equality. But that question for me, the answer is there is a distinction. And Black women experience discrimination differently from other women. And we are often at the lower end of many social development scales. And so we need to think about that. How does this impact women, Black women? And so as we all know, the United Nations and its members have concerned themselves about issues of non-discrimination based on race and sex since the inception of that organization, right? And in 1945, in the charter, they talked about the principles of dignity and equality inherent in all human beings. And then at the Universal Declaration in 1948, they again stated that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Today, the principle of non-discrimination based on race, gender, religion, language, all of this comes up in almost all, I think in all actually, the UN Human Rights Conventions, which states have signed on to in very large numbers. So they have accepted that this is something that they ought to be working on together, individually and together, and in collaboration with the United Nations. So we've been talking about this issue since the 1940s, and in the case of racism, even before that, as we talk about the transatlantic trade in enslaved persons. Right? We talked about this issue extensively in 2001 at Durban. right? And a number of mechanisms where we had a special conference on racism, the United Nations Conference on Racism. We've had a number of mechanisms that evolved in the UN since there, some 6. So we had a working group on people of African descent. We have the special rapporteur. We have the intergovernmental working group. It's a lot. Why are we still talking about it? Why are we still doing this work? Because quite frankly, it is still a concern. Many countries have included equal protection clauses in their constitution, particularly as regards to race, less on the issue of women or sex, but most countries have addressed this issue in terms of race in their constitution. So they've brought it at the national level as well. So while there have been some progress to some extent on working on these issues at different levels and in different spaces individually, the coming together of these terms, the intersections of race, that's Blackness as we're referring to it today, and sex as in womanhood as we're referring it today, has barely come together. In recent years, in the last 20 years or so, I think Kimberly Crenshaw has been really talking about this issue of intersectionality, which is a term that she, came up with, and really to explain the oppression of African-American women. And how, basically what is she saying is that intersectionality has been described as sort of a framework for conceptualizing a person, a group of persons, or as how discrimination and disadvantages affect them on varying levels. So you're not just a woman, you're a Black woman, you're a lesbian Black woman, you're a Black woman with a disability, and all those issues ought to be taken into consideration when you're considering the particular human rights concerns or the advantages or disadvantages of a particular woman, in this case in the case of a Black woman. So it looks at overlapping identities and experiences of individuals and groups of individuals. So the theory also looks at the disadvantages, multiple forms of discrimination that individuals can face. So I think understanding intersectionality is essential in combating the interwoven prejudices that people face in their daily lives. You cannot see a person just as a one thing. There are often many different persons in the one person. So we need to see the person as a whole. And as a member of the Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, we're still discussing, as members, we're still discussing our agenda, our program of work, what we're going to be working on, and so forth. But I see this issue already emerging as among the priority concerns that would likely be given a closer look by the forum in the coming years. The Permanent Forum, as many of you would know, became operational on the 2nd of August in 2021 through the United Nations General Resolution 75314. It provides really a platform for improving the human rights, the safety and quality of life and livelihoods as well of people of African descent globally. So, and while the group is tasked to look at this, I think what is really crucial is that the forum will provide a space for people of African descent themselves to have a voice, to speak to those issues that are important to them. And we, as the forum members, will facilitate that. So we anticipate a wide participation of civil society and other UN entities in ensuring that the voices of people of African descent and all the cultural diversity of people of African descent are brought to the stage and are known. Right, so another key priority for us will be the development of a declaration on the rights of people of African descent, and I think this is going to be crucial. This I think it's something that will take some time, and I think about the Indigenous Declaration, which took more than 10 years. I think I'm hoping that ours will take much shorter time, but I know that it will be negotiated for quite a bit on what issues do we want to include in there, and what is important to us as a people, right? So I really foresee that the declaration will mention issues of Black women, issues of Black youth, issues of Black children, and various groups, various minorities within the population of people of African descent. And I just want to perhaps quickly mention, when we talk about people of African descent, whom are we speaking about? We're speaking about Black people, generally Black people in the diaspora. We're not necessarily speaking about Africans who are in Africa, but more about people who are in the diaspora. And so this relates very clearly to people from the Caribbean region, people in Latin America and elsewhere, where we have significant populations of people of African descent. So as the resolution says, we have 10 members in the forum that will be putting together this work and in support of people of African descent. So the resolution provides that 5 of the members were to be elected by the General Assembly, and June was one of the 5 that was elected by the General Assembly. And 5 members were to be appointed by the President of the Human Rights Council. I was one of the 5 that was appointed by the President of the Council. But we also have, in addition to ourselves, we have colleagues from Cameroon and China, Colombia, Costa Rica, Egypt, Kenya, Sweden, and the United States. So this is a very diverse group who I think is going to do some excellent work and add to the extensive body of work that exists currently and that is ongoing by organizations, by mechanisms, UN mechanisms such as the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the Special Rapporteur, who's doing a significant work on thematic studies, the Working Group on People of African Descent that's looking also at country-specific work. So we will be working very closely with them and through our own experiences, building this body of work to ensure that people of African descent, rights of people of African descent can be further promoted, protected, and respected. And so for us, as said, this is something, this issue of womanhood and Blackness, or the rights of Black women, will certainly be something that will be on our minds as we take forward this work, particularly for June and I, coming out of CARICOM. We're both CARICOM endorsed candidates, and this is something that is of particular interest to us. And I'm going to stop now and allow June to provide a little bit more information on how this relates to CARICOM, and then hopefully we can have a discussion on some of these issues moving forward. So I hand it over to June just now, and thank you all for listening. You're muted, June.
Thank you very much, Gaynel, for this introduction, very comprehensive introduction. Your knowledge of the UN system really is an asset to the Permanent Forum. I would like to also thank the organizers for this invitation. Originally, in a previous life, I was a historian, and I still try to ensure that the history is understood. We must put this in context. And for you to understand that our region, the CARICOM region, has always been a region that has fought for that equality that Gaynel told us about, the removal of racial discrimination. All of these fights that we see during the period of enslavement was for that equality, was for a call to recognize that we as Black people are humans. And I have to make this point because from the beginning, it was clear that people of African descent, Africans and people of African descent, for 3 centuries were described really as chattel. We could be bought, sold, willed. We had no control over any of our rights as people. If you look at the slave registers during that time, you see us listed in the assets of plantations. So you would see 10 cows, 2 pigs, 3 Negroes, etc. So we did not have that humanity. And that is what we had fought for all of these years. And that is why we are still fighting, Gaynel. Anytime people ask you, this is why we are still fighting, because the humanity has still not been accepted. We are still not accepted as humans. And when I speak a little more about women, Black women, you'll understand that Black women have always been at the bottom of the table. And so in the CARICOM region, in the Caribbean region, we have always fought for these rights throughout enslavement, right up to independence. And that process puts the first thing that we fought for into context, and that is decolonization, quite apart from our humanity. We wanted control also of our countries, and we saw that process taking place in the late 19th century and early 20th century, taking us into independence, so much so that both Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago are celebrating 60 years of independence this month. I mean, I think it is critical that we recognize that along with the, what we are doing on the 31st of August, that our own countries have been also fighting for this recognition. It's not simply about African liberation, but about our liberation as CARICOM people. And to me, part of the challenge was what happened in the post-independence period. The fact that we had received independence made us believe that we were really, truly in control of ourselves and what we were doing, without recognizing that the systems that had been put in place had also to be decolonized. We also had to look at this, the legal, the financial, the fiscal, the social, the economic systems that were put in place during enslavement and were reinforced with the notion of colonialism. And we think that we have been decolonizing, but what we have been doing is not tackling imperialism and what it really means in the region. And because we have accepted these imperial constitutions, we have not tackled what you spoke about with regard to the rights of women within these constitutions. Remember, we did not have these rights as women during enslavement, and it was written into our constitutions, and Black women continue not to have these rights. And so I think that in about 2013, when CARICOM started to look at the reparations and what reparations meant, so that is the next phase, because I think that independence goes through different phases. Well, I think that emancipation goes through different phases, and independence is one. And then reparations must be part of that process. And then removal of colonial constitutions will be the next step. So I think that the reparations, we are at that step where we're looking at reparations and what that means to the Caribbean. And I'm very proud that our leaders have taken this position with regard to reparations and are tackling it at a number of different levels, and trying to not just look at people of African descent, but we also look at the indigenous communities and what was done, because that genocide of the indigenous people set out the framework for how Africans were treated, that we were nothing and that we could just be killed at women's fancy. And so CARICOM is also looking at that. We recognize that one of the challenges that we face is a developmental one. The fact that when emancipation was granted in 1834, and then apprenticeship put in place, and then with further enslavement, because that's what it was, further enslavement of our people, that compensation was given to people who owned us as property. So part of our emancipation, and one of the primary reasons why emancipation was granted was because these people were getting compensated for their property that they were going to lose. Not that they lost any property, because they put a lot of legal systems in place that would ensure continued enslavement after emancipation was granted. And CARICOM has taken this challenge on board to stop this racial apartheid that was imposed since emancipation, or reimposed or strengthened in the post-emancipation period. And so we are looking at the rights of people of African descent and how we need to remove these institutions that continue to keep us as criminals. And you see it in the language. You see it in the language that is attributed to Caribbean leaders, to African leaders. I mean, I think it's one of the things, Gaynel, that we have to talk about, how we decolonize the language, the things that are said about us. So we are considered corrupt. Any corruption you see has a black face. And we have to remove this notion that we are, everything that we do is corrupt, and everything that we do, we must be more transparent than everybody, so that you see the legal systems and that are attached to our financial systems, the legal rules and regulations that are attached to our financial regulations, must hold us accountable. Doesn't hold any other race accountable, but we must hold Black people accountable. It must hold people in the Caribbean accountable, which is why our financial services go through these traumas every few years. And so we have to work on this issue. So CARICOM has concentrated, I think, on a 10-point action plan, which calls for a number of things. And one of them include a formal apology, which is the first thing we are asking for. And you heard it a lot with the recent visits of the royals, that Caribbean people from the Bahamas all the way down to Guyana were calling for that apology, and that apology must be accompanied by some kind of restitution. And we need that, I am a Roman Catholic by religion, and there's something called absolution within that whole concept. You cannot just apologize and think or say that you are sorry without putting something in place to ensure that we recover, we pause, we recover, and we develop. And so I think that the 10-point reparations plan is really about development. You know, in the post-World War II period, and even before the post-World War II period came into place, Britain put in place development plans for places like Canada. The white colonies got these plans for development. In the post-World War II period, we see Europe having the Marshall Plan, you know, for development. No plan has been put in place with regard to people of African descent in the Caribbean. We were just given independence. And Prime Minister Gonzalez is very fond of saying that in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for example, when independence came, there were 2 schools, one for girls and one for boys. No attempt to look at tertiary education, you know, at the highest level. In fact, if you look at the post-emancipation period, prisons were built in our countries before schools were built. So our emancipation, our freedom was always tied to criminality. And so I think that these are some of the things that we have to look at. And the 10-point plan speaks to the issue of these things. So it speaks to, for example, the development of public health, is addressing the public health crisis in the Caribbean. And you could have seen it again, the public health crisis in the Caribbean during the COVID-19, where there was an apartheid approach to the distribution of vaccines and giving us information and relevant information. Certain countries had access to that. The rest of us did not Africa, and certainly not countries that have people of African descent. And so we have a number of public health crises that we're addressing, things like high blood pressure and diabetes, etc., that were caused and because of the trauma that it is now within our DNA that Black people cannot process sugars and salts properly. There is a whole literature written on that. And we have to address these things. And it is part of and as you said, things are disjointed a little at the UN. So we have the NCDs that we put on the agenda and they have accepted, but it does not filter into our reparations claims, neither does it filter into the issues related to women and women's health, etc. And so these are the things that we are looking at the level of CARICOM. We are looking at the issue of an African knowledge program. We know very little about our history as people of African descent. We know a lot more now because we have been writing about enslavement, but our history did not start with enslavement. We have a rich history before that. And in the Caribbean, we are starting to look at African knowledge programs and what we had before. And they know what we had before was great. It's in their museums. It's in the museums worldwide. If it's not in the museums, they have destroyed it. When they colonized, they destroyed what existed. So our knowledge, a lot of our knowledge and what we had achieved and accomplished was destroyed to make it look as if we were primitive people and we did not know what was happening. So now a lot of things that we have done, like the building of the pyramids in Egypt, and the role of the Nubians in doing that kind of construction is now being attributed to aliens. Okay, it had to be people from space who came down to do these things, not recognizing that Black people had the knowledge. We knew mathematics, we knew these things. And so we have to reclaim our African knowledge. We have to look at the plan speaks to that, about the psychological rehabilitation of people in the Caribbean. We were traumatized and we remain traumatized. And part of that trauma, I have to say, Gaynel, is the fact that we refuse to accept that we are grown up now and we need to speak about enslavement and the things that affected us. So which is why people will ask you, why are you all still talking about that so many years later, not realizing that they have been traumatized and they're trying to keep away from these kinds of discussions because they don't want to relive what has happened to them. And so we need to look at these issues. The part of the plan also calls for the eradication of illiteracy. As I said before, our education systems have remained colonial. We cannot say anything else but that they have remained colonial. Our curricula is forever tied to Britain, even within CXC, and we refuse to decolonize and teach our people who we really are. We also are calling for things like debt cancellation. And debt cancellation is important, especially when you look at what is happening now with the climate crisis. We are the ones who are getting the double dose of it. First of all, we were brought to the Caribbean as chattel, and the extraction process which took place in the Caribbean destroyed our lands. And we have been left with trying to develop and to recover from a plantation system that was so ubiquitous that it affected every facet of life, including the environment. And now we are being faced with the fact that climate change is affecting us even more than other places when we contribute very little to the climate crisis, and they are supposed to be putting in place systems and financial systems to help us, but we are not drawing down, etc., while we are being devastated by hurricanes and having to rebuild every year, rebuild our infrastructure, rebuild and rebuild, without recognizing that we need the debt cancellation. We did not go into debt because our governments were corrupt. Our governments have undertaken infrastructural development and other forms of development that were not put in place before independence. We were just left to go out there. We wanted independence. They said, okay, look, take independence and go and do what you want with it, without putting anything in place for the recovery and the development of the countries. And so these are the things that CARICOM has on its agenda. And you'll hear us speaking a lot to these issues when you, especially when you go to the UNGA, when you listen to the UNGA, you will hear our governments speaking a lot about these things. And it's not just about reparations. It's about developing and redeveloping the Caribbean. I think that I will pause here and then speak a little more to the issue of women, not simply with regard to what CARICOM is doing, but what I see us doing. And I don't know if you want to take the lead with regard to this point, Gaynel, but I would like to put on the table that I'm part of the reparations movement. I'm on the committee, I'm a member in St. Lucia. And for me, one of the most important issues is the reparations for Black women. We were systematically raped during enslavement. We were sold and our children were sold. Our children were born into slavery. Our children, they were children who never knew freedom until 1838, because, and I'm saying 1838 and not 1834, because although apprenticeship came and children 6 and under were immediately free, where would they go? They still had to work. They still were being taken care of, women who were given less rations than men, and women who were expected to work alongside men and produce as much. A very important case study is Barbados. And Barbados is the only slave society where there were more women than men. And that is because very early, the planters who were developing that system realized that women worked just as hard as men in the field, and at the same time could reproduce children to replenish the slavery system. So we were twice raped, by this system, and our children, our families were destroyed because of the system. They could be bought and sold at any point. And so for me, putting down reparations specifically for Black women is very important. I think that we need to look at it generally, reparations generally. But for people who are at the bottom of the slavery system, who remained at the bottom of that slavery system, and who remained at the bottom of society in the Caribbean since then, because once emancipation came and wages, we started to pay wages for labor, we started to get less because we were women, even if we worked as hard. And women have had to fight for their rights in the labor movements for us to be able to get equal rights. So equality, yes, generally, but more, the fact is, and I will tell people that all the time, all those say why women's rights, all these women's things, issues and so on. We were the ones who were the most abused by all of these systems. And we have not been able to reclaim our humanity because of that. When you look at the systems, all the people who have all our images of beauty are not Black women. We are not considered the beautiful ones. I want reparations for every Black woman who has been told that she's not beautiful, simply because of the color of her skin. And I want us to fight to continue to recognize that we have to remove this entrenched patriarchal system that has kept Black women at the bottom. And look at the memes that followed Ketanji Brown. Memes of her as a monkey. She could not be a beautiful Black woman who was intelligent and who was going to be part of the Supreme Court. I want us to be able to look at these issues specifically also within the forum. So I will rest my case at this point and hear what others have to say on it.
If I may just add a little to that before we go to the Q&As, because I think it's important that we get there and we have a dialogue. But this is a challenge that I have in dealing with the rights of women in the region, and I've done work across the region on this issue. We've been to Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Dominica, here in the Bahamas. We've done work on this in various countries, and there's this continuous sort of echoing that I hear, that you women want everything, that you, what else do you want? You know, we give you everything. Women have achieved in education, and that has been by hard work. Women they have achieved in many spaces. But even though, when we did the statistics several years ago, and many of you would have heard me say this before, when I was a director at the Department of Gender, we had 78, I think, % female graduates at the University of the Bahamas. And we had 18% of women in leadership, in political leadership, in public life, in public life, and 19% in the private sector. So there's this perception out there that, oh, you women are getting everything. And we have achieved in the public sector, because you see more women judges, you see more women lawyers, you see more women in prominent places. But when you look across the board, that doesn't bear out in terms of what we have achieved in terms of our education, right? It doesn't bear out in terms of what we achieved in terms of in the workspaces. And when you look at issues of race and gender in spaces like private banks, and many persons on the call who may know of people working in the private banking industry in the Caribbean will say, you know, we have eminently qualified women. and all of a sudden, you know, they can be running the bank and doing incredible work, paper qualifications, perfect. And then all of a sudden you see that you have, you know, a white Swiss man or a white British man coming in to run the bank. And you look around, you have many women, and then you may have 1 or 2 men that are the bosses, right? So we still need to look at those issues. When people say that, and, you know, we make blanket statements, and then people can't really see, because there is prosperity, we have had some progress. And I see we have Marion on the line, and I would love to hear your views on this, Marion. Sorry to put you on the spot, but Marion is a member of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW committee. But there is still a concern in this region, and you mentioned it, June, the issue around violence against women, how many of women are being killed. This became very evident during COVID. It has always been in my mind. I told them I don't have to think very hard, and I can think about 5 women that I know of in my lifetime that have been killed by their significant other. And we've seen this a lot more coming to the streets, where men are beating women in the streets. And I asked a question the other day, and I mean, it's not a scientific understanding of anything. We had a woman that ran into the back of a car, but her car accidentally ran into the back of another car. And these 2 guys that were driving the car, apparently that was hit, came out and beat this woman up. And you know, the question was asked, would they have done that had that been a man? And then some people will say, well, maybe they would have shot them. It's becoming a very violent society. And then I asked another teasing question in that, would she have been beaten up if she were a white woman? They were like, well, I don't know, right? So that's a kind of a question. You know, in all this madness, are we really mad? Or is there some understanding of what we're doing in terms of who we're doing it to? Are we being discriminatory even among ourselves, or is there an issue of colorism among us, right? And is there an issue of racism within the Black community? And so I'd like to have some discussion around that. I think the working group has its work cut out for it, and definitely reparations is one of the things I would want to see high on that agenda. I know it's a CARICOM priority. It's certainly one that we will be promoting, June and I would love to see the issue of women, particularly Black women, being prominent on that agenda. I know the working group on people of African descent just did something on children of African descent and what are some of the challenges, and the particular concern of health of Black people. We are challenged globally, particularly by non-communicable diseases. And so I'd love to see that, but I think we really need to start with some basic stuff we spoke about when we were in Barbados the other day, June, issues of definition, so we're clear on what we're speaking about. The data that we're collecting, do we know what we have? The communication that communicate with, how we refer to things, how we speak. So are we getting the communications right? You know, and are we ensuring that we can really get the message out there so that people don't come with these, you know, intelligent people don't come with these questions of why are you speaking about that? They need to make the connection. It's not because they're unintelligent, they're always very intelligent people, but they haven't always made that connection. And I think we can help them make that connection by providing that forum. We have 2 more years, as I said, on the decade. We need to think about how we can use those 2 years to promote this issue of racial discrimination, of discrimination against people of African descent, and particularly the issue of violence against Black women, and how do we deal with that in this region. I will stop there, and I'd like to open the floor for questions, please. I hope we can have a bit of a dialogue. We have a few more minutes for that. Thank you so much, everyone. Alicia, are you on the line?
All right, everyone, this is your time to shine. If you have questions, comments, please raise your hand. If you don't want to be on screen or you don't want your voice heard, that's fine, use the chat. I have lots of questions I can ask, but the space is for you. I see someone is saying, I think this is a response to one of the last things you said, Gaynel, that the very idea that anyone can give us anything is the root of the issue. And they went on to say the whole, I'm missing another comment, but they kind of went on to say this idea that this particular group of people, that men are superior and that nature put them in charge, is a problem.
Yes, let me say something on that also. We have, as women in the Caribbean, survived despite the fact that the system is a patriarchal one, because we will grab every opportunity. And look what we have done and made of ourselves because of who we are as women. In spite of the fact that the system was not designed for us. There is nothing gender specific or specific to women in the education system. We are treated as a neutral, as somebody or a set of people who are just neutral, you know. And so I think that our success that Gaynel was speaking about in the education system has nothing to do with the fact that we were given anything. It has nothing to do with us being given anything. It's because we have taken advantage of every opportunity that has presented itself. And I think that is what patriarchy is fighting in the Caribbean. Because unfortunately, a lot of our own people have latched onto it. That it is, and the same superiority that white men think that they have over Black people, Black men now think that they have it over white women. Black women, they don't realize that we are fighting the same demon, that we have to look at it as how we unify and come together to fight that demon. Instead, they turn around and fight us and say, and then conclude that we are fighters, and so they really don't want us as their women. You know, so I think that a lot of it has to do with how we decolonize their minds also. I think women are in a different mind space now.
And thinking about the forum that you're both independent experts on, can you tell us, have you been talking about some of these things, some of these deeply rooted ideologies, these anti-women, anti-Black woman ideologies, and what the forum can do or will strive to do to address that at the societal level, or to maybe influence it by using multilateral organizations and large INGOs, NGOs, perhaps?
If I may, yes. I mean, we are still at the very early stages. We started our work, well, it was launched last year. We started our work sometime in late March, maybe even May. We really started having conversations. We had the first meeting of the 4 members of the forum from Latin America and the Caribbean. That's Costa Rica, Colombia, St. Lucia, and Bahamas. So we met in Barbados and we had conversations around that and some of the priorities that we ourselves saw. But of course, as a group, as the full 10, we've not met yet. Our first official meeting will be in December of this year. Before that, we will have sort of a face-to-face informal session sometime in September, early September, where we hope to have some of these discussions. So this is still at a very, very early stage, but I definitely do see already some of these issues coming up as we have our informal discussions, online discussions and so forth. But we haven't gotten into that. We're still at the level of developing methods of work, program, outlining the program, what it ought to look like. But I will say one thing, Lucia. A big part of this will be engagement with civil society. And we have talked about that during your recall. We do not want it to only be the big name NGOs. We want grassroots NGOs from the Caribbean and Latin America that are working on these issues in small communities. We want their voices to be heard. So we are mindful that there's some big names out there working on these issues and doing fantastic work, Black Lives Matter, and we know all the big names. They're doing great work, but we want to ensure that space is given to NGOs from the Caribbean and from those countries where NGOs' voices are hardly ever heard on the world stage. Somebody mentioned to me from Brazil that, you know, you talk a lot about George Floyd, the world, and that caught the world's attention. She said, we had so many George Floyds, so many people killed by the police, and we want our voices to be heard on these issues. And when it comes to America, it's heard. And I see that as an opportunity for us to build on what comes out of the United States, not sort of try to compete, but to build on that, but really to use the opportunity to give the voices to smaller NGOs who are working in rather challenging and difficult situations.
And I said also that I noticed that somebody put in a question with regard to the region taking the lead in some of these issues, especially with regard to capitalism and imperialism. And we have been taking the lead. And you as an NGO can, or NGOs in the Bahamas can have their voices heard. I can tell you that the reparations system in the Caribbean feeds into the heads of government meeting. So we can start from doing it nationally. I know that you have recently established a national reparations committee, and you have to ensure that what they take forward is your voice to the CARICOM meetings, because the committees feed into the commission and into the heads of government meetings, so that what the governments must say must reflect what you want them to say. And we have never had that opportunity like we have it now. And we have to take advantage of it. And as Gaynel said, George Floyd gets a lot of attention and what has happened in the US. But I can tell you that the US takes its lead with regard to reparations from the Caribbean. Europe takes its lead from the Caribbean because we have made so many strides. Some of the successes that we have had with universities in Britain, universities in the United States, starting to give back, even banks, because a lot of these banks exploited us. Do you know that Barclays Bank, for example, was established around the period of enslavement and funded the slave trade? You know, these people owe us a lot, and we have to make these demands of them. And we have to make the demands of them with regard to the colorism issue, because they try to play us off on each other. Or you are a little lighter, so you are more acceptable. And I have seen it on many different levels. Somebody said to me once, "You are not quite black, are you?" And it threw me right back into enslavement, where St. Lucia was part of a system of French colonial system and a British colonial system, where there were 164 shades of black to make you more acceptable. And we continue to do that to ourselves, to think that our women who are darker, of a darker hue, are not as acceptable. And we in the Caribbean continue to perpetuate it because we want our children to be a little lighter, you know. In St. Lucia, I don't know if it's the same phrase. In the Bahamas, you add milk to your coffee. And that kind of racism that we don't realize is racism that we have inherited and it's part of us, and we need to get rid of it. We need to get rid of the systems that exploit women, both capitalism and imperialism. And when you speak about other systems, then we come under fire in the Caribbean because we are socialists or communists, and you see what has happened to places like Cuba and so on, and Jamaica in the 1980s, etc. They tried to destroy you. And so it will take all of us as citizens to raise our voices. I see that there are people raising their hands, and I should stop.
Thank you both so much for your contributions and responses to these comments. I see we have a question or comment from Ava. So Ava, go ahead, and then we'll come to you, Michelle.
Hi, good evening. I wanted to, perhaps you can let me know if perhaps you may have already touched on this, but I wanted to just hone in on, when we say we, and we talk about the work of civil society and the need to educate on the grassroots ground level, I'm wondering, is there also a similar focus on the executive, on representational politicians to ensure that our leaders are also speaking with this one voice? And I wanted to know, particularly from both of you, because I see based on your background, Gaynel, I know you work very well, but I know that both of you have both public and private sector experience. And I'm wondering, in working with governments, how important is it, or is there a gap between where our leaders are? Because obviously, the public, the way democracy works in theory, and whether we have a true democracy in the region is neither here nor could be debated. But this power amasses at the grassroots level, and it forces the electorate forces our leaders, our elected leaders, to follow through and to make are you saying that there is a connection between this desire and those who are leading us, those who are sitting around the table in sort of these global forums, and there should be more sensitization happening there? Because you would discuss these very nuanced topics, and when we look at our political debate, the level of our political debate, you wonder whether there is a true understanding. And I'd like to wrap a very long, rambling question, what has been your specific experiences, and where do you see the challenges?
For me, the issue of elections, where you went with elections, is a very important thing, because I have found that there are not many issues that are raised during the time of election, and people accept these rather vague manifestos without drilling them down into what specific they will do. I am seeing changes in that, however. I looked at the last election in my own country, St. Lucia, and the issue of people of African descent and reparations and women's rights is very prominent in the discussion, And another part of our challenge is that our governments are influenced by what is happening in the rest of the world. So we have right-wing governments and we have left-wing governments in the Caribbean, or those leaning towards the left. And so there is a debate between the two sides with regard to how they should approach certain subjects. But I can tell you that there are certain things at the level of CARICOM that are not for the debate, So the issue of reparations is not one that is for debate anymore in the Caribbean among Caribbean leaders. They have accepted. Some will push a little more. So in St. Lucia, for example, we are pushing to have a curriculum that will teach our children about the African history. So that is part of the plan. You have a government that has also, at this time, not that other governments have not in the past done it, who are promoting issues around knowledge and things like emancipation. So this year we had a huge emancipation awareness program. I wouldn't like to say celebration, but awareness program. And you've seen it developing in all of the Caribbean countries. It comes to some later than others, but I think that there's a trend that everybody's picking up on. I wouldn't like us to ignore the role that civil society and the very critical role that civil society has played. Let me tell you, when the royals came and went to Belize, Belize is one of our most quiet countries. And they said to them, you cannot come because of what you have done to us. People, the indigenous groups, the people of African descent said, you cannot come. And so there are countries like Grenada, for example, which didn't even allow them to land, which said, look, if you land, the people who are in the reparations committee want to have their say, want to say to you X, Y, and Z. So they never even landed in Grenada. And so civil society groups are making their voices heard, and governments are listening, because there's this momentum in the Caribbean that we have to seize. We have to seize the moment and move it forward. So never underestimate the influence that civil society can have on the agenda. I know people always say, oh, we have been doing this for so long. Never give up the fight. I know I will not give it up for reparations and reparations for Black women. So.
Yeah, I just add to that very, very quickly, because I see we have a couple of other hands up. I mean, and just to sort of build on what June said, I think it's important that we engage civil society, and that civil society uses its influence to force our governments. I had to use the word force, encourage maybe is a better word, our governments to act. And I do believe that governments in the Caribbean are becoming more in tune with these issues and are having these discussions. Certainly since the recent referendum in the Bahamas, and I came just around that time, just after the referendum. It's been a lot of discussion. We've talked a lot about it. When I first came to present on, and I think Marion might remember this, I think it was 2012 or something like that. I came and I did a workshop with NGOs with good friend Donna, who unfortunately passed recently. But I didn't recall hearing any discussions about gender, women's rights, human rights in the media at all. Today, when I turn on the radio, almost every day, and I see Erin Green is on the call on this line. I'm going to call you out, Erin, because I'm so impressed with the work that you guys are doing. You know, every time I listen to Guardian Radio a lot, almost every single one of you is speaking about these issues of human rights, women's rights, LGBTI rights. These things were unheard of. So I am, a couple of years ago. So I am really impressed with what is happening, with what civil society is doing to push this forward, to make it happen. Work that you, Alicia, and others are doing on this agenda of women's rights. Continue the excellent work. I do believe, Ava, that we need to do more to ensure that our leaders are on the same page. And we talked about this just before the last election, that we needed to ensure that we don't only have women in politics, or leadership, but we have women that are carrying the banner of women's rights issues, that understand women's rights, that carry this banner, that understand it and promote it. It's no point in having, 15 women in the room who don't believe in human rights, who don't believe in women's rights. And we can't assume that because they're women, they actually believe that women should be equal to men, or that women's rights issues should be on the table, or that they should be carrying it. There are many women who don't believe that. And so we're not only concerned about numbers, but you're right, we do need to continue to work with our leaders, our women leaders. We have an impressive number, I think, this time in Parliament and in Cabinet. which is great, but I think we need to have even more. And we need to continue to educate them. June and I are developing a strategy so that we work with CARICOM, so that we work with Caribbean leaders, our foreign ministers, that we work with our missions in New York and in Geneva to ensure that when they speak at the UN, when they speak on these issues, they actually when they speak generally, when they make their country statements, that they actually speak about issues that are important to us, issues on reparations, issues on women's rights, issues that are relevant to racism and racial discrimination, issues that our people face in international institutions. Racism, we do face it. And so we're saying, I agree with you, we need to ensure, and that is one of the things that we're going to be looking at strategically in how we engage with our diplomats. We've had a number of conversations already, and we will continue to do that to ensure that we keep this, we address this issue at varying levels and not just at the one level. I'll stop there and let Michelle and Ernestine take the floor.
Go ahead, Michelle. I think Michelle might have stepped away. Ernestine, are you ready?
Hello. Just checking. I didn't get to test the microphone before I came in. Oh, mic isn't working.
We can hear you.
Oh, thanks. Firstly, I'd like to apologize if I'm rolling my eyes. I was just looking at the ceiling fan. I'm sorry for that. I think Michelle would like to say something. Okay. So I wanted to bring to the table the issue of, well, colorism was already mentioned, but I'd also like to bring to the table the issue of the adultification of Black girls and young Black women. And it's talked about, but not to the extent I'd like it to be spoken about, because there are many instances in which young Black girls are seen as more mature or fast or more grown up than their white counterparts. And that bothers me because, like, I'm not sure if this is more on the political side, but it does excuse a lot of sexual abuse done to Black girls, and it has been used to excuse that from like the dawn of time. It's like, oh, don't wear that skirt, your uncle coming over, like, it's concerning. I wanted to bring that to the table and ask, what is everyone's views on the adultification of young Black girls? That's one of my topics I wanted to bring to the table. So yeah.
You want to tackle this one?
Yeah, yes, definitely. I was trying to unmute. Sorry about that. Yes, this is definitely a concern. This is definitely a concern. And, I think it has a lot to do with, well, we have to really focus our attention on education, on how we, that's why I said communication and language and understanding these issues is really very important. We tend to impose on even young children, things that Black children, that and we have certain expectations of them that we don't have of others. And I used the example, I will give you a quick anecdote with my own daughter. We lived in Europe and in the United States, in New York. And, there's a perception that there was this perception that as a 5-year-old, that, she shouldn't be doing certain things. And when she does those things, she's rude. But you have other 5-year-olds who will do these things and they're having a bad day. They're just having a tantrum. They're just having a bad day, and put them in the corner. So this happens for little Black children and Black girls, especially from a very, very early age. And so we start placing certain things on them very early. When we were at the department, we also did a short kind of campaign to understand about harassment, and we did something with high school students and even if, 7th graders, so 11 and 12-year-olds, to understand. It was called My First Harassment. And what was interesting from these children is they start to be harassed as early as age 7 and 8. I mean, references made to their body parts, references made about their thighs, or you're developing, or you're soon a young lady, or you're getting nice. References to what was the first occasion you can remember someone speaking about your body part. And many of those children talked about age 7 and 8 already. Not that they were touched in any way, but made to feel that they were not little girls, but that they were actually already being sexualized. So we have to really begin this work at a very, very early age. We had another discussion with the older kids, and when we had a sort of a 2-hour, they could use their phone and put in the chat room things that had happened, and you know, without full disclosure, they didn't have to say who they were or anything, and we promised that we would delete those, and we did. And in that 2 hours, we heard everything from those 7, 8, and 9, 9, 10th, and 11th graders, so 16, 17-year-olds, everything right up to what I would describe as rape, what I would describe as abuse, sexual abuse. And many, of course, enders. We were talking about harassment, but they took it even further. And what they described was happening. So one of the things, I mean, so I'm just saying that the children themselves recognize this. There was also a study, I think, done by Sandra Dean Patterson and those, Donna and those at COB, that talked at the College of the Bahamas, where many people thought that it was okay to be beaten up by their boyfriends. If your boyfriend, how do you feel about your boyfriend slapping you? Oh, it's okay if I did something wrong. So we have to begin to re-educate our children from a very, very, very early age. And I always give this anecdote. When I was in Jamaica, I was really shocked. We were speaking with a very senior person. I won't say which area, but a very senior person. When we were talking about the issue of sexual harassment and so forth, and the gentleman said, the man said, so I didn't want to take away that word gentleman. The man said, well, I don't know what all this problem is, Miss Curry. It's just a little sex. I'm like, but we're talking about rape. Yeah, but it's just a little rough sex. And we hear this sometimes on our own radio station where people talk about rough sex in the context of marital rape. So we have to have a sort of a re-education almost about about the situation of girls and women in the country, and how they are perceived, and how and what sort of stereotypes, what sort of gender stereotyping we do in terms of boxing them in as sexual beings from as early as age 7. And so just to say, Ernestine, I hear you on that. I think that's something that a lot of work needs to be done on that. We started that work, and the Ministry of Education were very pleased with it when we did it with the 7th graders, the 11-year-olds, who were so smart, and I just love the way they expressed themselves so clearly on these issues. And some of the parents called and said, thank you for that. You know, my daughter, my son called, said that you spoke about this issue, and I like the way you handled it. And it was in a respectful way, and in a way that they could receive it at their age group. But the Ministry of Education said, Ms. Curry, can you do it? Really develop something for our 9th and 10th graders, because we have a big problem. We have a big problem. So just to say that this is something that I think the Department of Gender ought to be working on strategically, thinking about how to do that, and pulling in knowledgeable civil society members like Lucia, like Sandra Dean Patterson, like others who are working on this and in this space. I'll end there, but just to say, yes, we have a lot of work to do on this.
Yes, we do have a lot of work to do in terms of educating, but I think that 2 things that we need to do with regard to the legal system are very important. In most of our countries, the age of consent is 14 years old. So after 14 years, after the 14, men cannot be prosecuted for having sexual relations with children who are, 14 years, 15 years, and 16 years old. And we need to look at these laws again. you know, and we also need to prosecute the people. That is the other thing we need to do. We need to have more prosecutions. People get away with these things, which is why they still consider it a little rough sex. You know, we need to prosecute these people for the things that they do. And they need to pay. I mean, none of us have a register of sexual offenses, you know. And I'm saying that when it becomes a serious problem with regard to young men, because it's already a problem, then we will look at it even more seriously. But let us do it now that it's happening to young women. Let us look at the legal systems also.
I think both of you, Gaynel and June, talked about this sort of idea that rape is sex. And I think we have to consistently work to make it very clear that rape is not sex, and that sex only exists where there is consent, and even more conversations about pleasure being integral to sex and sexual acts. Because when we miss that out of the conversation, then you kind of help to perpetuate this idea that only one person is supposed to benefit, and generally speaking, it's the man or the masculine presenting person. So we definitely need to make that distinction really, really clear. And anytime someone uses the word sex when we're talking about rape, you just have to cut it off and say, nope, not the same thing. That's not what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Ernestine, I see your hand is up again. I'm going to ask you if you have a follow-up on this same topic, to go ahead, but keep it kind of brief so that we can get to Michelle and then another person who has a question before we close.
Okay, so on the topic of rape is not sex, I think a lot of people forget the fact that safe words exist. So even if you want to engage in these rough activities, there are many ways it could be clear that it's not rape. It's not like they don't consider adding safety. They don't do they don't do the research on the things that they want to do with their partner. Most people, especially with the Bahamas being a more conservative country, there isn't enough sexual education that happens because it's not something that people want to touch upon. So a lot of people my age and younger, like, they get most of their sexual education from porn, and that's not okay. And on the topic of adultification of young girls, honestly, I strongly feel like I actually want to circle back to, I can't remember who mentioned it, but the image of femininity and beauty not being the Black woman. That's really interesting, and not enough people mention it, because when I look up pictures of like goddesses or some kind of ethereal feminine being, it always shows me a white woman. And it's not that it can't be a white woman, but it automatically just goes to being a white woman, and that's strange to me. There's also not enough representation of Black girls in the media, and I know I say I'm a little all over the place, but I just want to get this point across. We see a lot of Black men on screen, and we see biracial women or lighter skinned women. Like, they have one Black man and one Black woman, and the Black woman is 10 shades lighter than me. And it's fine. That it's good that Black, like, biracial women get representation, but to combine it with the monoracial Black experience is kind of a gray area. You know, that's all I want to get into. Also, like, I just feel like representation could help a lot, because like as a queer Black woman, one of my nephews, he told me to my face, like, I thought being gay was one of the worst things someone could ever be, until I saw you and your partner and how great y'all are together and stuff like that. And I'm like, wow, I didn't think that could work like that or happen like that. But yeah, people need to get more comfortable with the idea of Black women or just Black people born and raised as women, just embracing their Blackness unfiltered because Black men get to do it. That's all I have to touch upon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ernestine. I think that you give us so much to think about in terms of how Black women and Black girls get to be, and the ideas that we have about femininity, and that some of us actually start to believe for ourselves because it's what we see and what we hear perpetuated in the sorts of restrictions and requirements that are placed on us. So there's really a lot to think about with what you shared. Thank you so much for that. And I think there's a lot that we can dive into probably in future Women's Wednesdays as well. So definitely keep an eye out for when the next few are coming up. Michelle, are you there and ready with your question or comment?
Okay. Hello?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay, great. I'm actually connected using two different devices because I realized one isn't working. Okay, so I'm going to bring us back a little bit to some of the previous things that were said. So my question is a little complicated, and it's emanating from the conversation about reparation. So I have appreciation for the things that were shared. And I do believe that systematically and evolutionary change will take place to unfold as we become more conscious as a people and collectively as a people and as Black women. However, my concern is that as I listen to the argument on reparation, and I listened to the aspect of the psychological issues and the traumas that we have gone through, and we look on the traumas as affecting our thoughts about ourselves and enslavement. Not only has it affected how we our thoughts on enslavement and traumatize us in that area, but it has actually changed our behavior as individual and as a people. If you sit back and you observe the Caribbean approach to individuals' reaction to each other and even across countries, and the discrimination that exists among ourselves and among our societies, we realize that what enslavement did to us was far more than just trauma. It has actually created a culture that has literally been over evolution, over time. It has been seeped into our DNA. Now, my question is, how do we, I know we ask for reparation and we ask for an apology and we want to fix our systems and all of that, but my question is, how ready are we for these changes or for us to accept these things that will be given to us based on our behavior of corruption, based on our behavior of the crab in a barrel approach, as we usually use in the term we use in the Caribbean, based on our general behavior of oppressing each other? How prepared are we, and what systematic changes and mechanism will be put in place to change the mindset of people so that so that we will be ready for accepting the resources that will be given to us, even accepting the apology that will be given to us, and making a developmental change in our whole approach to life, to people, and just generally. So that's my question. As I said, it's a little complicated, but yet simple.
It's not complicated. It's actually very much on point. It's very much on point. One of the things that we recognize is that to a large extent, the reparations movement must also prepare the people. And education is very necessary, which is why in most of our countries, we have this mass education around reparations and what it will entail and so on. It will take a long time. You know what I liked in your question? The hope that reparations was coming that something was going to happen, that we were going to be given finally what was due to us. I mean, in terms of financial resources for us to develop our countries. That has been going on because reparations started, the call for reparations started the day we had the first revolt. That was the first call for reparations, and centuries later, we have not seen anything coming out of it. But we have to prepare ourselves also. I saw an interview not too long ago in Britain, where a director of a museum was being asked whether or not he was going to repatriate all of the things that were stolen from Africa back to Africa. And he said something to the effect that Africans did not deserve these things. Mind you, it was the history that was stolen because they had no way of preserving or appreciating their own history. And that was very telling for me because it said to me that we are still being perceived as people who cannot manage their future. That we had to be the gradualism that was entrenched in the Emancipation Act to give us things gradually because we were not prepared as Black people to make things out of it, still exists today and still exists among our people. We think that we are not ready, our systems are not ready. We have to make them ready. We have to make them ready for us to be able to benefit from all of the scholarships that are starting to come online, for example. Only certain people will benefit because they know what is happening. But we have to make sure that the benefits of reparations are felt by the lowest among us, the most deprived among us, the poorest among us, the real people of the Caribbean. We have to make sure that they feel the benefits of reparations. And so we must, the next step then, with any plan, must be the implementation phase. Gaynel will tell you that as a good UN person, that we must have an implementation plan for these things to be effective. We cannot just say, okay, we're going to get $100 million from this person and another 20 million from that person or whatever, billions or trillions, you know, and we don't have a plan on how to put these things in place. So may I ask you then to tell your reparations committee of the Bahamas to take it to the level of CARICOM that there must be an implementation plan. There cannot be a call for reparations without an implementation plan. Yes, we say education systems. Yes, we say cultural institutions.
Hello?
I think we might have had an internet dip on June's side.
Yeah.
Give her a couple seconds, see
Yeah.
if she gets reconnected.
Okay.
In the
But just to
meantime-
add that,
go ahead.
add to that, I just want to say that while June was speaking, it occurred to me that in these last 2 years of the decade of people of African descent, we need to, I think many people didn't even know that we were in a decade of people of African descent, just to start with. And so and then I was recently asked, are you going to be having, should we lobby for a second decade? I'm like, well, we need to justify what we did for the first one. And I think in the last 2 years of this decade, that's an opportune time for us to be thinking about how are we educating, how are we engaging, how are we dealing with these issues, particularly with respect to reparations. Because if we are going to be negotiating a declaration, I can assure you that, it's probably going to be a bit of fight all the way to the end, but we're ready for the fight, in terms of how we implement reparations in that declaration. But I think in the meantime, we ought to be using the next 2 years and demanding of our governments that they put something into the decade. Nothing has been put into the decade. No money, no resources, no anything. People don't know it exists, no nothing. So we really do have to think about how we use the next 2 decades and do it a lot more in terms of educating. And I'm getting a message here from June, probably telling me that she got bumped off. But yes, I just wanted to add that point. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm also seeing in the chat, Erin is saying that she will have chair of the Bahamas National Reparations Committee on her show. That's on the clock on Guardian Radio
Awesome.
on Thursday, August 18th at 10 a.m. So that's next week. That's 10 a.m. the Bahamas time, which means it's 9 a.m. Jamaica time. And those who are not in the Bahamas, you can tune in at guardiantalkradio.com. And then you'll see the little play button that you can press to hear the show live. That'll be
Awesome.
10 to 11 or 9 to 10 if you're in Jamaica. We had another question. Hopefully this question is for you, Gaynel.
Okay, tell
Please
me.
go ahead. I'm not seeing your name, but you know who you are. Your hand is up.
Hi. Hello. Hold on.
Hi,
Give
we're
me one.
hearing you. Go ahead.
Just to say, June is trying to re-enter. She just sent me a message to say that.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you so much for the information. By the way, it was a lot to process, and I appreciate it. First of all, especially for the space right now. But as I heard you all speaking about educating people, educating the Bahamian people of the Caribbean people about the history in order for them to actually be able to defend themselves, especially young women, defend themselves in certain spaces, because some people really are not aware of the abuses that they experience. I'm from a place that is considered a ghetto in the Bahamas, and it's weird when you have conversations about people with abuse, and it's just like, oh, it's normal, it's whatever, this, that, and next. I heard all the conversations about that, and I just wanted to point to the idea that knowledge brings awareness. And I am aware of the high school system, the government school systems, where you have a bunch of high school readings, and I don't think that our government, for example, they haven't capitalized on the fact that we can use these times, the 3 years in high school, to bring awareness of, say, slavery, slave trade, exactly what happened, like actually zero in on it. Social studies alone is not essential, is not enough. And I'm aware that we all have history courses. In some government schools, it's electives. And so not everybody will be aware of what's going on. But at the end of the day, this sits the slavery, the abuse of women, the awareness that we all need. This should actually be something that's a foundation of our educational system. So I just wanted to know if we can use, for example, in our literature classes, who decides which books you should read, or which books we should read on slavery, and all the information that we actually need to stand on as a foundation for what it is that we need to, like, the other things that we need to defend ourselves in life, just to get that basic foundation, just to help ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to think about how we can bring this into the school system. We've been talking about that for quite a while, but it never really got off the ground. And I think there is a need to reassess so education, or the right to education, is not only access to education, it's quality education and what it is you're teaching. So we need to think clearly about that. And are we teaching enough about who we are and our own history and our own realities? I can't speak to that at the moment, unfortunately, but it's a conversation I would love to have with colleagues in the Ministry of Education. I don't know who decides. I imagine there is a committee of some kind, or some section within the Ministry of Education that's determining what the curriculum would be for the Bahamas. But I think it would be interesting to have a conversation. One of the things we did when we were at the department is we talked about how could we introduce some of these issues into the social studies space. Not everyone was open to the idea. We have to be honest with these conversations. Not everybody was open to this idea. When I first started talking about these issues, I got a lot of, I would say, backlash on on what we're trying to teach the children, that we're, sort of teaching them about sex, we're teaching them, to have sex and so forth. Of course, that was not the intention, but I will say that they're having sex anyway. It's in the numbers. We can look at, somebody mentioned the age of young ladies that are that are sort of sexualized. We can look at that in terms of numbers, in terms of things like STD, HIV and AIDS, look at the age groups of the girls that are, of the persons, the age group that is mainly increasing is young girls between the ages of 17 and 21. And so, you know, we have those numbers there. So we need to have that conversation, but not everyone is ready for it. I know there were several discussions to be had with the clergy and others in society to see whether there can be an openness of this discussion. I'm not sure where we are with that, but I certainly think it is a conversation that needs to be had. We have to prepare our children. That's really the bottom line. And you know, how we do that, of course, in an age-appropriate way, I think it's important for us to keep in mind, but keeping them in the dark about these issues on how they can protect themselves and so forth is not, in my view, the answer.
Thank you.
I'm back.
Yeah, we have June back with us.
Oh,
June,
hi, June.
Sorry for that.
No problem. Sorry, I have to apologize because I soon will need to go and run and do the pickup.
Yeah.
So in about 5 minutes, I will have to leave. So if you have any further questions for me, otherwise, you know, I'm here to listen for the next 7 minutes or so.
Yeah, I think we have some comments that I think might take us quite a bit of time to get through. There's, okay. Yes, there's one about folks in the US who are part of the ADOS movement, the African descendants of slaves, who sort of make a distinction between themselves and other Afro descendants, other Black people, which is quite interesting, and asking about, you know, whether or not CARICOM has a position on that or has a response to that. I don't know, Gaynel or June, if you are aware of any conversations or positions that CARICOM has taken regarding the ADOS folks.
I'll defer to June. June, are you aware of this in the CARICOM setting? Have we lost her again?
We might have.
Yeah, unfortunately,
I think we might have to do some
yeah,
research
I'm not
on
aware.
that.
We might be, yeah, I'm not aware of what's happening in the CARICOM on that, but I've heard discussions around this issue, and there's always this discussion, even in the UN. You know, why do you want to talk about people of African descent, and why do you want to define it in that way? What about all Africans? Because we're all, you know, facing racism and so forth and so on. You know, there's a lot to be said there, and of course there's racism on different levels, but I think we need to recognize the particular concerns that individuals have and not lump everyone together in a group, particularly if they don't want to be so lumped, but hear them and recognize what their concerns and challenges are. That's how I would want to deal with it. That's why I think it's so important to hear from civil society and hear what their specific concerns are, and why they feel that they need to have a special compensation or a special focus in this discourse on racism, reparations, and people of African descent. But just to say that I wish I had more on it, but unfortunately I don't at this time, but that's something I will certainly be looking into. June is the person who I'm sure would have a lot more on that from a CARICOM perspective.
And I don't think that this will be the last conversation that we have. Definitely not with you, Gaynel.
I hope not. I hope not. I mean, I hope we've sparked enough interest to continue the discussion. This is not intended to be the end at all, but the beginning.
Yes, and I know there's a big day coming up. Do you want to tell us about that day coming up, August 31st? What is the day? Why does it exist? And anything in particular that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, so August 31st is the International Day of People of African Descent, and it's a fairly new recognition by the UN. I think this is just the second year, but it's really something that I think we've been lobbying for a while, that we need to think about this issue, and it's really in the broader context of the decade, and looking at issue of recognition, justice, and education for people of African descent. And remember, we talked about, we have to first recognize that there is a concern that we exist and we have a right to be here and be in this space and share this space with others. And so this is what it's about. Here in the Bahamas, we are looking to do some work with the Reparations Committee, and hopefully with UB and with Equality Bahamas, on how can we begin looking at this issue. And I said it in my presentation briefly, but I want to reiterate that I think it's important for us to be clear on what we're speaking about. So I would like the first discussion to be around sort of, as you rightly put, Alicia, demystifying some of these concepts. So there's a lot of confusion around what we mean when we talk about racism, when we talk about racial discrimination, when we talk about xenophobia, when we talk about reparations. What is it? What do we mean? Does everybody get a wad of cash in their hand? What are we talking about? So I would like, and we're discussing quite, we're still in the very early stages of it, a sort of a forum where we can have a demystifying of some of these concepts and a sharing of ideas as to how it relates specifically to the Bahamas and more generally to the Caribbean. How do we, as Michelle rightly says, are we ready, and how do we prepare for reparations? How are we dealing with issues of racial discrimination? How do we deal with issues of colorism, and what do we mean? And those intersectionalities that I talked about at the beginning between gender and race, or womanhood and Blackness, you know, and I would love to hear from white or Caucasian or, you know, non-Black sisters in the Bahamas and in the region, because I'm sure there's certain intersectionalities that they particularly have concerns about. I would love to hear and love to understand and see where we can perhaps share some common ground. But just to say that I think it'll be an opportunity for us to, and I'm hoping, Erin, that once you have the chair on your show in a couple of days, next week, Thursday, she will speak a little bit about it. We're still in the early stages, but hopefully by then she will have a little bit more to share on what it is we plan to do. But it's really a very first step. My idea, as we discussed with Alicia, is to have something regularly for the next 2 years as we wrap up the final 2 years of the decade. We cannot let this decade go by and then we did nothing, and then we turn around and say, can we have another decade? I don't feel comfortable asking for another decade when I can't show what I did with the first decade. Okay, we can say that we had COVID for 2 years or something like that, and that sort of knocked us off our course. But really we had, you know, before that 6 years, what did we do? So yeah, but just to say that hopefully the conversation on racial discrimination, on issues of people of African descent, the intersections of race and gender, the broader discussion around reparations, discussions around health and Black people in the region, how our history has affected us and our health and continues to affect us through these non-communicable diseases. But yeah, there's going to be an initial discussion on the 31st of August, and we're hoping to have all of you on board. Stay tuned. We'll have more information coming out from Equality Bahamas and hopefully also from the Reparations Committee.
Awesome. So more to come.
Yes.
No worries about other questions and comments or anything that you think of later on, that you can bring them to the next session, the next discussion, the next workshop, whatever it is that we have coming up, and listen out for what will be happening on August 31st and beyond that. Yeah. And in particular, over the next 2 days as we continue in this very special decade.
Yes.
Many thanks to you, Gaynel, and to you, June, joining us, our Bahamian and
thank you. I managed to get back in just to say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Gaynel, for summing up for us.
Thank you.
To say that we hope that we can engage some more with the various NGOs and groups in the Bahamas, especially. I am so proud that the Bahamas is coming on board so strongly with these issues right now. We have not been hearing your voice. And now that we know that you are really there and that you have a voice, we want to make sure that we hear it loud and clear. So thank you very much for this invitation. And it was my honor and my pleasure to converse with you this evening.
thank you so much. You both brought so much information and so many ideas and new perspectives for us to think about. And I think you've challenged us in various ways. And I think many of us will be mulling things over tonight and in the days and the weeks to come. Thank you once again for coming and being with us for almost 2 hours this evening, looking at the intersections of Blackness and womanhood and going even beyond that sort of focus and talking about so many other issues based on the questions and the comments that we got in this session. Just so you know what else is coming up with Equality Bahamas, we are actually having 2 Women's Wednesdays this month just to make up for the summer break. So please join us on August 24th. We are really excited. We're going to have Hannah Beard with us. She is a young woman in her mid-20s who built a house, and she's going to tell us how she did it and how more of us can be homeowners as women, as young women in particular. Join us for that August 24th. That's a Wednesday at 6 p.m. the Bahamas time, 5 p.m. Jamaica time. And the link to register for that is tiny.cc/WW, like Women's Wednesdays, house. Tiny.cc/WW house. She became a real estate agent. So she's got even more sort of inside scoop to let us know what the process is like toward home ownership. And before that, on Saturday, August 20th at 10 a.m. the Bahamas time, 9 a.m. Jamaica time, we will be joined by Rhoda Reddock from Trinidad and Tobago, who is a member of the CEDAW committee. And this is a part of our ongoing CEDAW speaker series that's leading up to the anniversary of, well, the 30th anniversary of the Bahamas ratifying the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, also known as CEDAW, also known as the Women's Bill of Rights. So we will be looking at Article 5, which is on gender stereotyping, but specifically looking at how that article is used by the committee to address the issue of gender-based violence, and even more specifically, gender-based violence against women. So if this is a thematic area that is of concern to you, that you're interested in, if you're really interested in CEDAW and learning more about it and how to use it, this would be a great session to join. Saturday, August 20th at 10 a.m. the Bahamas time with Rhoda Reddock. And to register, go to tiny.cc/CEDAW, CEDAW, the number 5, B. It's tiny.cc/CEDAW, the number 5, B. And all of this information will be available in the next couple of days on all of our social media channels, which is Equality242. So Facebook.com/Equality242, Twitter.com/Equality242, Instagram.com/Equality242. And you can also find us just by searching Equality Bahamas on all of these spaces. The recording for this and all of our other events will be available on our YouTube channel. Just go there and type in the title, type in Equality Bahamas, find our channel. We've got some really good playlists up there, from 16 Days of Activism to International Women's Day to our CEDAW speaker series. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. Really looking forward to seeing you again on August 20th and on August 24th. And don't forget to tune in to On the Clock with Erin Green on Guardian Talk Radio next week, Thursday, August 18th at 10 a.m. the Bahamas time to hear from Dr. Nyambi Hall Campbell-Dean, who is the chair of the Bahamas National Reparations Committee. That is it from us this evening, folks. Thank you again for joining and have a great remainder of your night.